Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? I do want to apologize. I'd written down some lovely comments and I put it on a USB. I did it on my home computer and then I forgot it this morning. So fortunately the GO train ride allowed me to kind of put down some of the my earlier comments. Glenn, thanks for having us. As Glenn pointed out, I was with RBC Insurance at the time before moving over to Northbridge, so I hope there's no one from RBC in the room. I'll have to watch what I say. But I was speaking more to, when we talked initially about the discussion was about, it was more, my experience was more about on the ground. Just to give you a little bit of background, we always feel inadequate after State Farm's been up and talked about all their helicopters and hundreds of people, their CAT teams. RBC Insurance, like Peace Hills, is very small. Bigger, I mean, when we think of the bank, obviously the bank is huge on the banking side, but certainly on the insurance, relatively small market player, more so in Alberta. When Slave Lake occurred, we have a small claims office out of Calgary, and we had one adjuster who happened to resign the Friday before the Slave Lake fire started. And we also had one inside adjuster. So I looked after Alberta, so it was essentially me, and I grabbed an inside adjuster and we flew out to Edmonton on Monday night. The RBC experience, I think we had about 45 to 50 claims, so relatively small, obviously, compared to the cooperators and Peace Hills. We had just about $2.5 million worth of claims. So our approach was a little bit more personalized, if I want to call it that. We were out there, the first thing we did was hit the communities of Westlock and Athabasca and set up signage for allowing people to report claims. Technology obviously allowed us to take claims, open up right away on our laptops and issue checks. We had a little bit of difficulty because a lot of our insureds who had registered at a lot of the communities, be it Red Cross or who was taking some of the information, they'd register and then they leave. So they'd either go to a hotel, they'd go to Edmonton or go to friends and family somewhere else. So we were getting reports of claims and then we were going to track them down so we could to really meet with them. We were in Slave Lake for probably about a week awaiting access, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I know Bob was talking about it just some of the frustrations. Once we had access, obviously we'd made arrangements with, we didn't have any contracting resources in Slave Lake just because of our policy base, so we made arrangements with contractors to travel with myself, and I brought, as I said, I was with another adjuster. We traveled with contractors, so we were hands-on. We could, they were coming to all the sites with us, so we knew exactly what we were going to do in terms of our scoping and what was required. Pretty surprised actually at the damage. Obviously the damages were massively widespread, but we had very surprised. We had a couple of homes. We're in the midst of other homes that had all burned around them with absolutely little or no damage. Very strange, and just in terms of absolutely no damage. I mean, outside of the smoke that was inside. Expectations, insureds, again, the impact to our insureds obviously varied like in most events, but definitely very, very significant after and kind of post, couple of months after, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. We ran into a lot of issues of, you know, RBC's paying this, or Intact's paying this, or somebody else is paying this, are you going to be paying that? So obviously a fair amount of challenges. Some of the biggest learnings we had probably when we look back at the whole experience, and I think Bob maybe touched on it a little bit too, and again, I don't want to upset anybody because I know there's a lot of people here from Slave Lake. I think there was an opportunity for probably greater lines of communication on the status of the site, on the status of just the access, and perhaps maybe a more definitive role for IBC. There were meetings that were happening. We'd find out about after they'd occurred. Some of the information we got was obviously a little bit spotted. Like in most events, I mean, you want to build relationships. We were building relationships with people, representatives from the ATCO gas, because those people were in there and they were actually relaying information back to us. And we were getting some more information from people that were actually on the ground versus the authorities. And I'm not sure, I don't know if it was perhaps, I don't want to say inexperience. I know obviously an event like this is massive and massively, obviously, is significant to a lot of people and their lives, but they just, the feeling, the perception that we had, that we were receiving from our clients just was that of somewhat chaos. Now, perception for some, but it was a reality for most of our insureds. Nearly every claimant we talked to talked about the lack of warnings, minutes to spare, grab what you had, grab your personal belongings, grab your jewelry, your pictures, and flee. A lot of experiences saying people were telling us they went down the road, they go to the Walmart parking lot was the meeting spot, and then they told we'll start to head out of town, and then they had RCMP officers directing them back because the fire had crossed part of the road. And I know, obviously, probably you guys will be talking about this a little bit later, but certainly it was what was reported to us. And as I said before, if it's perception or not, a chaos, a perceived chaos was a reality for many of our insureds. And I think this, in some ways, continued to some of the evacuation centers where the information was just not readily available for us. And most insurance could probably speak to it. It's a little bit frustrating when you're looking for those answers, and unfortunately not having the information available to us. I had some experience in Kelowna when we were, obviously RBC had just been starting out, and I know RBC guys were talking about they were fighting the fire for a little bit longer ahead of time, so there was just the reality allowed them to have a little bit more access and more warnings. I know someone asked the question of how far away and when do you start making that warning. So I know things obviously changed in Slave Lake, that the winds picked up and stopped. They had to stop fighting or stop whatever action was being taken care of. But in Kelowna, we had full access. There was a website. The streets, you knew which streets were affected. You knew which areas had been destroyed. It was all a bit of a guessing game in Slave Lake, unfortunately. Said before, our exposure was fairly limited. Probably, as I said, about 45 to 50 insureds. We had a couple of probably about 2 total losses. Has it done anything for RBC? I mean, I haven't been there in a couple of months, but probably similar experience to, we're a direct writer. The underwriters unfortunately haven't looked at it with any sort of, they look at it as more of a one-off experience. It's not an experience for RBC, unless you live in the interior of BC. I mean, nobody expects fires to burn through city centers. It did put a little bit of question mark about replacement costs, because obviously these events drive up costs. The homes that we were rebuilding were probably costing about 25 to 30% more than they should have, which is normal because of the resources. The reinsurance, our reinsurance folks at RBC took a bit of a different strategy. They moved to, or have since moved to, taking on reinsurance treaties that are more defined by a lesser amount as opposed to a huge exposure. So, an aggregated amount, $1 million 10 times versus having a $10 million policy, kind of a death by 1,000 cuts kind of strategy. But as I said, there hasn't been a whole lot of focus around it. I mean, it was an unbelievable experience being there and being on the ground. I was out there three separate occasions. One of the things I did notice, I know the gentleman from State Farm talked about psychological experience. It is probably the massive, I've been handling claims for about 17 years. Fire is definitely the biggest. One of the things that the response, I mean, I'm not painting a bad picture. There was a lot of amazing things that I saw, a lot of amazing communities come together in Athabasca and Westlock, a lot of people, and obviously in Edmonton proper, that came together to do, to really help people out. A lot of counseling services that were set up. I had the opportunity, I was in Slave Lake in October, November. I'd gone back out there to obviously dealing with a couple of these larger losses that we had. And that's when I think some of the greatest impact would have been, you know, if we'd had counseling that continued at that point. It wasn't the 3, 4, couple of weeks after, it's 4 or 5 months after. I mean, you had people obviously telling stories of, you know, they've moved on or divorced or whatever it might have been. I mean, it's had a huge impact to their lives. It's had a huge impact to the community. A very, very resilient community. I've been around a lot of different parts of Canada. It's a very, very resilient community. But there's definitely some of those learnings, I think, for insurers and things I'm taking to my new employer about, you know, some of those services that should be offered for clients, certainly around counseling, certainly around, you know, just getting past that and moving on with their lives. That's pretty much it for me.